On February 4, 2025, Robert Lighthizer, the former U.S. Trade Representative, delivered a grave warning regarding China's military production capabilities, asserting that they are 4 times greater than those of the United States. He characterized this disparity as an existential threat to U.S. national interests and advocated for a significant increase in tariffs against Chinese imports as a countermeasure. His remarks come amid a backdrop of intensifying geopolitical tensions between the U.S. and China, particularly related to trade. Context of Lighthizer's warning. Lighthizer's comments are rooted in a broader context of escalating U.S. China relations. Following the election of Donald Trump, who has pledged to impose a 60% tariff on all Chinese imports, the debate over tariffs has gained renewed urgency. These tariffs are intended to address long-standing grievances such as the U.S. trade deficit with China and allegations of currency manipulation. However, experts are cautioning that such high tariffs could primarily impact U.S. consumers rather than China, drawing parallels to the previous tariffs imposed during Trump's first term, which resulted in increased costs for American households. Tariff debate and economic implications. The discussion of tariffs as a strategic tool has reignited fierce debate among analysts and policymakers. On one side, proponents argue that tariffs can serve as a necessary negotiation tactic to compel China to adhere to fair trade practices. On the other hand, critics warn that such aggressive measures could provoke retaliation from China, potentially leading to a new Cold War scenario. Experts emphasize the need for a more nuanced approach that combines economic pressure with diplomatic engagement to avoid exacerbating tensions. Lighthizer's call for increased tariffs is not without controversy. Analysts have pointed out that while tariffs might bolster U.S. negotiating leverage, they often lead to higher prices for American consumers. Historical data from previous tariff implementations indicates that the burden of tariffs has largely fallen on U.S. households, raising concerns about inflation and the overall economic impact on the average American. Broader geopolitical implications. In addition to the economic ramifications, the geopolitical landscape is shifting in response to China's assertive actions, particularly in the South China Sea. Observers have noted that China has expanded its influence in the region with minimal resistance from the U.S. and its allies. This has raised questions about the U.S.'s commitment to its regional partners and its ability to counter China's territorial ambitions effectively. While there is a consensus on the need to respond to China's aggressive tactics, there is divergence among experts regarding the most effective strategies. Some suggest focusing on China's manipulation of its currency and its significant holdings of U.S. debt as alternative methods to address the trade imbalance without imposing heavy tariffs. This approach could potentially alleviate the adverse effects on American consumers while still holding China accountable for its economic practices. The call for strategic measures. In summary, the prevailing discourse reflects a growing recognition of the existential threat posed by China, not only in terms of military capabilities but also in economic terms. Lighthizer's advocacy for increased tariffs underscores a broader strategy to confront this challenge. Although the potential consequences for U.S. consumers and international relations warrant careful consideration, analysts emphasize the importance of adopting a balanced approach that weighs economic pressures against the necessity of maintaining diplomatic channels with China. As the U.S. navigates this complex landscape, the need for a cohesive strategy that encompasses both economic and diplomatic measures becomes increasingly apparent. The stakes are high, and the path forward will require careful calibration to avoid escalating tensions while effectively addressing the challenges posed by a rising China. The content presents several counterintuitive points regarding Robert Lighthizer's warnings about China and the proposal for increased tariffs. Here are the key counterintuitive insights. 1. Tariffs burden on U.S. consumers. While the common perception is that tariffs primarily target foreign producers, history shows that U.S. consumers often bear the brunt of these costs. Analysts argue that previous tariffs resulted in higher prices for American households rather than significantly impacting China. This challenges the assumption that imposing tariffs on China would effectively punish the country without adversely affecting U.S. consumers. 2. Strategic versus confrontational approaches. Lighthizer and others call for aggressive tariffs as a strategy to confront China's economic practices. However, many experts suggest that a more strategic and measured approach may yield better long-term results. The counterintuitive notion here is that a confrontational stance could provoke retaliation from China, escalating tensions rather than resolving the underlying issues. 3. Impact on international relations. The expectation that tariffs will strengthen U.S. negotiating power is countered by the idea that they could worsen diplomatic relations with China and allies. The notion that punitive measures might lead to a new Cold War and increased risk of military confrontation contradicts the belief that economic sanctions alone can effectively manage geopolitical rivalry. For rebalancing trade without tariffs, some commentators propose alternative measures to address the trade imbalance with China, such as focusing on currency manipulation and U.S. debt holdings rather than relying solely on tariffs. This suggests that there are potentially more effective strategies for addressing economic grievances that do not involve the conventional reliance on tariffs. 5. Economic self-sabotage. The article argues that the very measures intended to protect U.S. industries could inadvertently harm them. If U.S. prices rise due to tariffs, it could lead to a stronger dollar, making American exports less competitive and worsening trade deficits. This highlights a paradox where protective economic measures could undermine the intended goal of enhancing U.S. competitiveness. 6. China's resilience to sanctions. Another counterintuitive insight is that the aggressive measures taken by the U.S. could inadvertently strengthen China. For instance, the actions targeting Chinese technology firms and scientists might lead to increased Chinese self-sufficiency and resilience. Instead of diminishing China's global influence, such measures could consolidate it by pushing China to innovate and develop its industries further. 7. Long-term versus short-term gains. The immediate political appeal of tariffs contrasts with their potential long-term economic drawbacks. While they might provide short-term political leverage, the broader economic implications, such as inflation and market inefficiencies, could negate any temporary benefits. This suggests that policymakers may need to consider the long-term consequences of tariffs more seriously. 8. Democratic deficit in foreign policy. The content implies that the concentration of foreign policy power in the executive branch has led to a lack of checks and balances, echoing some of the governance issues seen in China. This raises the counterintuitive point that the U.S. approach to containing China could mirror the very authoritarian tendencies it criticizes, undermining its democratic values. These insights highlight the complexity of U.S.-China relations and the potential unintended consequences of tariff policies, emphasizing the need for a nuanced approach to international trade and diplomacy. In the recent report featuring former U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer's warnings about China's military production capacity and economic practices, several crucial points may be overlooked by many readers. Below are these important elements and their significance. 1. Existential threat versus economic competition. Lighthizer's characterization of China as an existential threat emphasizes the severity of the geopolitical landscape. While many discussions focus on economic competition, the framing of China as a direct threat to U.S. interests shifts the narrative from mere trade imbalances to a security dilemma. This distinction is significant as it suggests that U.S. responses may need to prioritize national security considerations over economic ones, potentially justifying aggressive tariffs or military posturing that could escalate tensions. 2. Military production capacity. The assertion that China's military production capacity is 4 times that of the U.S. is a staggering statistic that highlights the imbalance in military readiness and potential capabilities. This fact may be overlooked in favor of more immediate economic concerns. The implication is that the U.S. may need to reassess its defense spending and military strategies in the face of such a disparity. Understanding this can inform debates on budget allocations and military policy, which could have long-term implications for U.S. national security. 3. Impact of tariffs on U.S. consumers. While the report mentions the concern that tariffs primarily impact U.S. consumers, the extent of this impact often gets lost in discussions about trade policy. The historical precedent shows that when tariffs are imposed, prices for consumer goods tend to rise disproportionately, affecting lower-income households. This aspect is significant because it highlights the risk of backlash against policymakers who support aggressive tariff measures, as they may alienate the very constituents they intend to protect. A nuanced understanding of the socioeconomic implications of tariffs can inform more equitable policy discussions. 4. Strategic alternatives to tariffs. The suggestion that the U.S. could focus on currency manipulation and debt holdings as alternatives to direct tariffs is vital. These strategies may offer avenues for addressing trade imbalances without the immediate negative impacts on consumers and businesses. The significance here lies in the potential for more sophisticated economic diplomacy that might preserve U.S. economic interests while avoiding the pitfalls of a trade war. This point is crucial for policymakers who may be inclined to resort to tariffs as a first measure rather than exploring more complex economic negotiations. 5. Geopolitical ramifications of a confrontational approach. The discourse around potential retaliation from China in response to increased tariffs does not just pertain to trade, it extends into broader geopolitical relationships. Ignoring this dynamic could lead to a miscalculation in U.S. foreign policy, potentially resulting in a new Cold War. This aspect is significant because it underscores the need for a more comprehensive approach to U.S. China relations that considers diplomatic engagement alongside economic measures. The potential for a military confrontation due to escalated tensions is a serious concern that warrants careful consideration. 6. China's influence in the South China Sea. The report touches on China's aggressive tactics in the South China Sea, which may be a sidelined issue in trade discussions. The strategic importance of this region cannot be overstated, as it is crucial for global shipping and energy supplies. Understanding the implications of China's territorial ambitions there adds another layer of urgency to the U.S. response. It emphasizes that economic measures such as tariffs are interconnected with military strategy and alliances in the region, making this a complex issue that requires a multifaceted approach. 7. Democratic deficit in U.S. foreign policy. The observation that U.S. foreign policy making has shifted towards a concentration of power in the executive branch raises critical questions about accountability and oversight. This aspect may be overlooked in favor of more immediate concerns about tariffs or military strategy. The implications of this trend suggest a need for a renewed focus on democratic processes in foreign policy discussions, emphasizing the importance of checks and balances in decision-making that could prevent hasty or unilateral actions that might lead to conflict. 8. Historical context of trade policies. The historical context of trade relations, particularly during Trump's first term, informs the current situation. The previous tariffs and their long-term effects provide essential lessons about the potential consequences of similar policies today. Recognizing the cyclical nature of U.S.-China relations can help avoid repeating past mistakes and encourage a more strategic, informed approach to trade and diplomacy. 9. Economic coercion and supply chain dependencies. The report hints at China's potential use of economic coercion and the implications of U.S. dependency on Chinese supply chains. This matter is often overshadowed by the immediate focus on tariffs or trade deficits. Understanding the broader implications of these dependencies is crucial, as it reveals vulnerabilities in U.S. economic security that could be exploited in times of conflict. This recognition may prompt discussions on domestic manufacturing and supply chain diversification, which are essential for long-term resilience. 10. The role of allies in the U.S.-China rivalry.
The potential impact of U.S. actions on relationships with allies is a critical point that may not receive adequate attention.
As the U.S. considers tariffs and other measures against China, it must also navigate the reactions of its allies who might be caught in the crossfire of a trade war. The significance lies in the need for a coordinated international approach to manage the challenges posed by China rather than unilateral actions that could alienate partners. In conclusion, the report brings to light several critical points regarding the U.S.-China relationship, particularly in the context of tariffs and military capabilities.
Recognizing these often overlooked aspects can lead to a more informed and comprehensive understanding of the complexities at play, ultimately guiding more effective policy decisions that balance economic interests with national security concerns and international diplomacy.
1. China's military production capacity. Robert Lighthizer's assertion that China's military production capacity is 4 times that of the United States presents a critical point for national security discussions. This extreme disparity not only poses an existential threat to U.S. interests but also raises questions about America's defense capabilities and strategies in the face of potential military confrontations. Such an imbalance necessitates a thorough evaluation of U.S. defense spending, military readiness, and strategic alliances, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region where tensions over territorial claims are escalating. 2. Tariffs as a tool of economic policy. The call for significant increases in tariffs, particularly a proposed 60% tariff on Chinese imports, highlights the ongoing debate about the effectiveness of tariffs as a negotiation strategy. While proponents argue that higher tariffs could serve as leverage against China's economic practices, critics warn that such measures may disproportionately affect U.S. consumers and exacerbate inflationary pressures. This point necessitates an in-depth analysis of past tariff impacts, consumer behavior, and potential retaliatory measures from China, alongside alternative strategies that could address trade imbalances without imposing heavy tariffs. 3. Geopolitical implications and the risk of a new Cold War. The potential for a new Cold War due to escalated tensions between the U.S. and China is a significant concern. Analysts suggest that a confrontational approach could provoke retaliation from China, leading to severe ramifications for global stability and economic relations. This point invites discussion on the broader implications of U.S.-China relations on international alliances, global trade networks, and the risk of military confrontations, particularly in contested regions like the South China Sea. For China's economic overcapacity and global trade dynamics, the issue of China's industrial overcapacity presents a complex challenge for the global economy, particularly as it relates to trade tensions with the U.S. and other economies. The interconnectedness of global supply chains means that tariffs and trade restrictions can have far-reaching effects beyond U.S.-China relations, potentially impacting European and emerging markets. Analyzing the implications of China's overcapacity on global trade practices, investment strategies, and economic policies is vital for understanding the future landscape of international commerce and economic diplomacy. These points provide a comprehensive framework for discussing the multifaceted issues arising from U.S.-China relations, encompassing national security, economic policy, geopolitical stability, and global trade dynamics. 1. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act 1930. This legislation raised U.S. tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods in an attempt to protect American industries during the Great Depression. The act was widely criticized for exacerbating the economic downturn, leading to retaliatory tariffs from other countries, which resulted in a significant decrease in international trade. The protectionist measures are often cited as a contributing factor to worsening the global economic crisis of the 1930s. 2. The trade wars of the 1980s. During the 1980s, the U.S. engaged in a series of trade disputes, notably with Japan. The U.S. imposed tariffs on various Japanese goods, including automobiles and electronics, to combat perceived unfair trade practices and protect American industries. This led to Japan agreeing to voluntary export restraints and other measures. These trade tensions highlighted the complexities of international trade relationships and the potential for tariffs to provoke retaliation and escalate conflicts. 3. the U.S. China trade war 2018 present, initiated by the Trump administration.
This trade conflict involved the imposition of tariffs on billions of dollars worth of goods imported from China purportedly to address trade imbalances and intellectual property theft. In response, China imposed tariffs on U.S. goods, leading to a tit-for-tat escalation.
The trade war had significant implications for global supply chains, economic growth, and U.S.-China relations, raising concerns over long-term economic repercussions and the potential for a more profound geopolitical confrontation. The future of U.S.-China relations is poised for significant turbulence as the geopolitical landscape evolves under the influence of domestic and global pressures. Former U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer's warning about China's military production capacity, coupled with President Donald Trump's return to a confrontational trade policy, will likely shape the trajectory of this relationship in the coming years. Increased trade tensions and tariff policies. With Trump advocating for a dramatic increase in tariffs, potentially up to 60% on Chinese imports, the immediate future suggests a resurgence of trade hostilities reminiscent of the earlier trade wars. Analysts warn that such tariffs may disproportionately affect American consumers rather than China, leading to increased costs for household goods and potential inflationary pressures. If the tariffs are enacted, the U.S. might see a shift in consumer behavior, with households tightening budgets in response to higher prices on essential goods. Geopolitical implications. The prospect of a new Cold War looms large as both nations adopt more hawkish stances. Trump's administration, backed by a potentially more ideologically aligned Congress, may pursue aggressive policies in the South China Sea and beyond. This could prompt China to further assert its territorial claims, leading to heightened military confrontations. The U.S. might be compelled to enhance its military presence in the region, thereby escalating tensions. Economic fallout and global reactions. China's response to increased tariffs will likely include countermeasures that could affect global supply chains. As China redirects exports to emerging markets and the EU, these regions may experience economic disruptions, forcing them to re-evaluate their trade strategies with both the US and China. The European Union, already grappling with its own economic challenges, may find itself caught in a balancing act as it faces pressures from both sides. Domestic challenges in China. China's economic landscape is fraught with challenges including overcapacity and a sluggish domestic market. As tariffs increase and global demand fluctuates, the Chinese government may be forced to reconsider its economic policies, particularly those that promote aggressive export strategies. Structural reforms could become imperative. But the ruling party's reluctance to undertake significant changes may hamper progress. Strategic alternatives. Experts argue for a more nuanced approach, potentially focusing on currency manipulation and China's substantial holdings of U.S. debt as tools for negotiation rather than relying solely on punitive tariffs. This strategy could mitigate the adverse effects on American consumers while still holding China accountable for its economic practices. Diplomatic engagement versus confrontation. The necessity for diplomatic engagement alongside economic pressure is underscored by the potential for miscalculations leading to direct conflict. The U.S. must balance its economic strategies with diplomatic initiatives to avoid exacerbating tensions. Future administrations may find that fostering dialogue and cooperation, particularly in areas like climate change and public health, could yield more substantial long-term benefits than confrontation alone. Conclusion. The future outlook for U.S.-China relations is characterized by increased tensions, economic challenges, and the potential for military confrontations. With Trump's return to the presidency, the landscape may shift toward a more confrontational posture, prompting both nations to recalibrate their strategies. The complex interplay of domestic pressures in both countries will shape how these dynamics unfold, emphasizing the need for a balanced approach that prioritizes diplomacy while addressing legitimate concerns over trade practices and military assertiveness. As the global community watches closely, the outcomes of these policies will have far-reaching implications for international stability and economic prosperity.